The U.S. is facing rising consumer prices and supply chain problems. Americans are seeing increasing costs for food, energy, and housing.
New data from overseas shows imports into the U.S. are down since the tariff war started, while exports to other countries are quickly climbing.
This means major powers such as China and India are finding other markets for their products. Madeline Rivera has more from Washington.
It began with a quiet announcement, barely a whisper in the corridors of Washington. But the repercussions would echo across the country. A policy that had been the cornerstone of an era, a signature of American economic nationalism, was quietly being reversed. Tariffs, once wielded as a shield to protect domestic industries and assert American strength, were being rolled back. The decision came not in a press conference or public statement, but through a strategic memo sent to key federal agencies. Within hours, news outlets caught wind, and the nation braced itself. Donald J. Trump, a president synonymous with trade wars and tariffs, had taken a dramatic turn. After years of framing imports as a threat to American jobs, industries, and economic sovereignty, the administration now admitted a reality long whispered behind closed doors. The United States cannot thrive in isolation. Global interdependence, whether welcomed or resisted, had become undeniable. The tariffs had been imposed early in Trump's first term, aimed primarily at China, the European Union, and Mexico. Steel, aluminum, solar panels, and a wide array of manufactured goods had been taxed at record rates. The rhetoric was simple and compelling: protect American jobs, defend domestic industry, and negotiate from a position of strength. Headlines screamed of victories against foreign competitors, of trade deficits shrinking, of deals renegotiated in America's favor. But the story behind the numbers was more complex. The tariffs brought unintended consequences: rising costs for manufacturers, disrupted supply chains, and friction with allies. Automotive plants in Detroit faced expensive steel. Appliance makers in Tennessee grappled with higher aluminum costs. Small businesses across the Midwest found imported components suddenly unaffordable. Consumers, too, paid the price. Tariffs are taxes, ultimately passed down in the form of higher prices. By 2024, economists began documenting the strain. GDP growth remained stagnant. Inflation ticked upward. Export markets, particularly in Asia and Europe, had slowed. Analysts noted a paradox. While trade deficits shrank, overall economic resilience weakened. Certain sectors, technology, agriculture, and consumer electronics, were increasingly dependent on imported materials and components. Tariffs, intended as shields, were becoming bottlenecks. Trump's decision to end tariffs, therefore, was not impulsive. It followed months of secret economic briefings, consultations with multinational CEOs, and studies commissioned by the Council of Economic Advisors. Reports highlighted the growing vulnerability of U.S. supply chains: semiconductors for automobiles, lithium for batteries, rare earth metals for defense technology. Much of America's industrial backbone was tied to imports. Without these inputs, factories could not function, innovation would slow, and global competitiveness would erode. Yet the reversal carried immense political risk. Trump's image had been built on economic nationalism, on being the defender of American jobs and the champion of the manufacturing heartland. Critics would call the rollback a betrayal. Opponents would brand it a confession of weakness. To navigate this, the administration framed the decision strategically, emphasizing pragmatism over ideology. In internal briefings, Trump was quoted as saying, "We have to be smart. Strength is knowing when to adapt." The immediate impact was dramatic. Stock markets surged as tariffs on key imports, semiconductors, steel, aluminum, were lifted. Manufacturers welcomed relief. Supply chains began to recalibrate. Factories in the Midwest and South saw their operational costs drop overnight. Consumer goods, long pressured by higher import prices, became more affordable. Economists hailed the move as an alignment with long-term economic reality. Global trade is essential, and no country, regardless of size, can fully insulate itself from the world. But the human and political dimensions were more nuanced. Trump's core supporters, particularly in the Rust Belt, were bewildered. Many had backed him explicitly for his promise to put America first, to fight back against foreign competition. Local newspapers ran editorials questioning whether the administration had abandoned the very communities it had claimed to protect. In Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, union leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss what the rollback meant for manufacturing jobs and regional economies. Across the nation, the narrative was fractured. Some saw the policy shift as evidence of pragmatism, a recognition that the global economy had evolved beyond tariffs and isolationist strategies. Others interpreted it as a capitulation, proof that economic nationalism was unsustainable in an interconnected world. Polls revealed a split in public opinion. 48% of Americans supported the reversal, citing lower prices and operational relief for domestic businesses. 42% opposed it, viewing it as a surrender to global competitors. The decision also had profound geopolitical implications. China, the European Union, and Mexico reacted cautiously but optimistically. Trade negotiations, previously tense and sometimes combative, entered a new phase. Exporters welcomed the reduction of retaliatory tariffs, while policymakers debated the balance between strategic self-interest and cooperative engagement. For decades, the United States had used tariffs as leverage. Now it faced the delicate task of maintaining influence without coercion. The reversal was emblematic of a broader truth about modern economics. Isolation is no longer a viable strategy. Supply chains are global, capital moves with speed, and innovation depends on collaboration. The semiconductor shortage of 2021-2022, the solar panel crisis, and bottlenecks in electronics manufacturing had revealed a stark reality. Even the world's largest economy is dependent on inputs it cannot produce domestically at scale. The administration's approach reflected this reality. Rather than framing the rollback as a weakness, officials emphasized strategic foresight. They argued that by securing access to imports while simultaneously investing in domestic production, the United States could maintain competitive advantage. Incentives for local manufacturing, coupled with free trade access, would create a hybrid model, a balance between self-reliance and global engagement. Yet, critics remained skeptical. The rollback was seen by some as inconsistent with earlier policies. Trump had spent years vilifying foreign producers, threatening tariffs on allies, and framing trade deficits as existential threats. The abrupt change raised questions about credibility and political calculation. Analysts noted that while the economic logic was sound, the messaging would be critical. Public perception could determine whether the move was a masterstroke of pragmatism or a political liability. Meanwhile, the corporate world reacted swiftly. CEOs of major American manufacturers issued statements welcoming the change. Automotive. Companies already struggling with high component costs celebrated reduced tariffs on steel and semiconductors. Tech firms, reliant on rare earth metals and overseas electronics, indicated that product development timelines could accelerate. Retailers facing pressure from higher consumer prices anticipated relief during the holiday season. The media narrative, predictably, was polarized. Cable news shows debated the implications endlessly, with pundits weighing patriotism against economic pragmatism. Newspapers analyzed historical parallels, recalling the Smoot-Hawley tariff of the 1930s, the Reagan-era trade liberalizations, and the Clinton-era NAFTA expansions. Columnists reflected on the delicate balance leaders must strike between domestic political expectations and global economic realities. Internationally, the response was more muted but meaningful. Canada welcomed the decision, highlighting the opportunity for smoother cross-border supply chains. Mexico emphasized that the rollback could stabilize trade relations and support regional economic growth. European leaders interpreted the move as a sign that the United States was moving toward cooperative engagement rather than confrontation. In Asia, the recalibration signaled a potential thaw in trade tensions with China, offering a path toward dialogue and negotiated solutions. For economists, The reversal illustrated a fundamental principle. The U.S. economy cannot operate in a vacuum. While tariffs may provide temporary protection for specific industries, long-term growth and innovation depend on open access to global inputs. Energy, technology, and raw materials are increasingly interlinked. Supply chains span continents, and isolationist policies often carry hidden costs. Domestically, the decision sparked reflection among policymakers and business leaders alike. The realization was stark. The United States, despite its size and resources, is not self-contained. Consumer expectations, manufacturing needs, and technological development all demand global engagement. Tariffs, though politically appealing at times, cannot substitute for strategic investment and long-term planning. Yet the rollback also highlighted a generational tension. Older voters, who had long embraced protectionist policies as a means of defending jobs, viewed the move with suspicion. Younger Americans, more attuned to global markets and supply chain interdependence, largely supported it. The divergence underscored a broader cultural shift, one in which economic pragmatism increasingly outweighs nationalist sentiment. In the months following the announcement, market adjustments became evident. Manufacturing plants recalibrated sourcing strategies, inventories were replenished, and trade volumes gradually normalized.